This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own move. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello and welcome back to North Pod. Thanks for joining me again. Hope you've had a great week. We've got a big episode planned for this week. We're going to go through the list and talk about all the match sim results and how each player performed. Got some general thoughts on the game that I'll start with. And then we're also going to have a quick look at the midfield preview, the rucks and the midfield players, just to finish off that section of the ground. So could be a longer episode. We'll see how we go. I do want to shout out Keith Ape for buying me 5 coffees / vanilla cokes. Really appreciate it, Keith. And if you would like to get a shout out on the show, please support me on Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the show notes and also on my link tree. So let's jump into the match simulation. There was a game, I think it was Wednesday morning, where it was a bit of a classic, a North Melbourne side versus half a North Melbourne side and some VFL players. There was a lot of swapping and, there was clearly a dominant side and a secondary side, but there was a lot of swapping of positions between the two teams. But certainly the blue team was the dominant side and probably had the majority of the players that you'd expect to play in round one. So they were the 64-point winners. In the end, it was a bit of a slow start. I think the yellow team, which was made up of VFL players and some North players, got out to a bit of a quick start and kicked, I think it was 3-1 at the start. But from then on, it was the blue team just sort of kicking away. There weren't too many players that stayed on the blue team all day. There was a couple. I think Sheezer was there all day. I don't think LDU swapped. I don't think Larkey swapped. I don't think McKercher swapped. So there's probably, 6 or 7 that stayed on the blue team for the whole day. But for the most part, most of those players were rotating through and spending a bit of time on each side. But yeah, certainly the dominant side was the blue side. Just in terms of my initial or general thoughts on the game, I mean, we've heard it all pre-season, but the game style was really on show. It was play on at all costs, run and gun, handball link up, long kicks, try and get out the back of the zone defense. And yeah, we saw plenty of that, just like we'd expect in the real deal. There were mistakes. We turned it over a bit, and there was a few players that were more guilty of that than others. But yeah, it was an aggressive style of play. We're going to need to make sure we've got players that can dispose of the ball under pressure to make this game style work. But yeah, I think it was a really good demonstration of what the game style is going to look like. We really were trying to just move that ball fast from defense to offense. And we're able to make that happen several times. And it looked good, but we also have to bear in mind that we're only playing against ourselves / some VFL players. So yeah, it was on display. It's going to be an aggressive, high-scoring style if it comes off. But yeah, I mean, my next point is that defensive team setup is still a bit of a worry. It was a big issue last year that teams would just waltz through our midfield and transition the ball quickly. And, even this VFL side was waltzing it through the middle of the ground and beating our press, particularly in the first and the fourth quarter. So that's a concern. I'm hoping that part of that is just we're still learning that, and part of it is we're nailing down those things. But yeah, I'm not sure to what extent it's a midfield problem or a whole team problem, but there was probably 4 or 5 times where the yellow team just really smashed it through the middle of the ground and got from defense to offense. So that's not obviously what we want to see. We want to see some improvement in that whole ground defense, because yeah, that was a real issue for us last year. And I think, the key backs were part of that. We know that we've got some really inexperienced key defensive stocks at the moment. Core's still not playing, so he's not there. Logue's injured. And at times they were really reminding me of Ben Mackay last year, in that I just thought they were making the wrong reads when they were trying to play aggressively and help up the ground and just not timing it well and not not reading it correctly, and that wasn't anyone in particular. I think most of the defenders were guilty of that throughout the game, regardless of what team they were playing on. So that's just something to watch for, I think, in terms of by the time we get to round one, hopefully that's looking a little better, and we'll see what it really looks like against proper opposition over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, that doesn't look like it's been resolved. I think there's definitely competition in places around the ground that we knew that there was. So the medium, small forwards, there's a lot of players to choose from there. We know that we're pretty stacked for midfield options. And the backline in general have lots of players. I don't know how many of them you could say are quality, but we've got heaps of options there. That's where we really heavily invested at the end of the year in terms of free agency and picking up some players. So yeah, those areas of the ground, we've got lots of options, and as we knew, our key forward stocks look really slim, and the ruck stocks look really slim. So that's the area of the ground that we knew coming into the season wasn't great, and even just playing ourselves, it shows. So part of me when I was watching this thought that this was a great advertisement for if Comben down back doesn't pay off, there's still plenty of opportunity for him to play forward. And anyway, well, it's very early, but those areas of the ground is where I'm seeing some options. And then finally, I think just broadly speaking, you can see what a difference it makes having a really solid group of high draft picks. So Sheasel and Wardlaw and McKercher, even Wilfield, alongside someone like LDU, like you can see having a big, not a big, but a solid base of players with that just absolute talent. It makes a big difference, and it's the sort of thing that those sides that played in 2020 and 2021 just really lacked. Like, sure, we had LDU and Taran playing at that time, and I think LDU was just on the precipice of starting to become a great player, and Taran was flighty at best. So yeah, just being able to see what holistically the team looks like when you've got some absolute talent in there, it's going to make a difference. That they just have that extra polish that a player picked in the 20s and 30s doesn't have. They might be able to turn themselves into a great player, but they don't have that innate ability like a Wardlaw or a McKercher. I mean, McKercher looks like he's been playing for 3 or 4 years at AFL level, based on the time that he had today or on Wednesday and his skill level. So yeah, that's promising that we've started. We've built up that base of talented players. I'm going to try and just really whip through every player on the list in terms of their performance in the match sim. Obviously, I'll spend some more time on some than others, but yeah, just going to cycle through, and I've written down a couple of things for everyone. But starting with Hugh Greenwood, he didn't play, so not a lot to say there. Steve-O. Jaden Stevenson was one of those players that I think I'd identified, and several people in the supporter group had identified him as someone that is maybe going to be fighting for his spot in the side. And I thought he had a fantastic game. He was probably he was definitely the best 3 or 4. He looked dangerous all game, kicked 2, and really should have kicked a couple more. He was guilty of looking for an option to centre it a little too often, and I think just needs to work on the chemistry with him and the rest of the forwards, because he really had that team first attitude. He was trying to centre it and hit opposition defenders 3 or 4 times, I'd say. So yeah, he looked super dangerous. Loved his running. He ran really hard and got into some great positions. So yeah, based on that, I think he's definitely playing round one. He's definitely got his spot, and he looked, as I said, super dangerous as that player that can go deep and also play pretty high up off half forward. Harry Sheasel played off half back, looked a class above, just continued off where he left off at the end of last year, was consistently hitting targets by foot, involved in several chains that went end to end. We didn't see him play forward or midfield at all. I thought, he was 100% backline, and I think it's a pretty good indication that's where he's definitely going to start the year. Will be interesting to see if when we're fully fit, if he does get experimented with in other positions. But Yeah, based on his performance on Wednesday, it's hard to see him playing anywhere else for the start of the year because he was just hitting targets and always being an option off half back. Aiden Core didn't play. He's going to be pushing for round one, but doesn't look like or sound like he's going to play any practice match time. So you'd think he might struggle to make it for round one. Curtis Taylor played mostly on the wing, didn't play a lot of game time. He seemed to be on restricted minutes. Didn't impress me. He was beaten in several one-on-one contests and didn't do anything to make me think that he's likely to play round one. So I still think he's in a bit of limbo, but there'll be opportunities on the wing, I think, if there's either form or if he's really knocking down the door in the VFL. But he wasn't fantastic. Georgie Wardlaw, who is obviously a fan favourite, I thought he was an interesting game. He got caught holding the ball probably 3 or 4 times, and I thought looked pretty untidy early, but had a sensational fourth quarter, I thought. Really aggressive at the ball, really developing that ability to link up with other players and not just be completely ball focused. And I don't want to be negative. He does need to figure out when to go and when not to in terms of his aggressiveness with trying to break a tackle and burst out of a stoppage. Obviously, we know he's mega talented and he's going to be a fantastic player. I think he's in that kind of Clayton Oliver mould. He's got quite a funny gait and doesn't look like much until the ball hits the ground and all of a sudden he's there. So I wasn't as impressed by his game as some other people, but I certainly think if you just watch the last quarter, you'd think he was best on. So looking forward to seeing more of him, and hopefully we can manage him sufficiently so that he doesn't break down during the year, and he's able to develop that form because he's going to be a special player. Zane Dersma was a good option up at half forward. Kicked a couple of goals, but as you would expect, wasn't a super high possession winner. He sat for the fourth quarter, so on some managed minutes as well. I think personally he's going to need to show me a little bit more in the next couple of games to make it for round one. He didn't do anything wrong, but he does look so skinny as that medium forward or third tall. So I liked what I saw, but I didn't see much of him, and his 2 goals weren't fantastic. Like, one of them was a Joe the Goose, so it could have been anyone. Bailey Scott still recovering from injury, so he didn't play. LDU was definitely best on ground. Looks like he should win the best and fairest if he can stay fit all year. Just has that capacity to coast and keep distance from players or burst away from a stoppage and create some space. It didn't look like he really had to try hard to dominate the game. He's got that beautiful penetrating kick. If I had to nitpick, I would love to see him lower the eyes or handball now and then, but aside from that, he was best on and it wasn't close. So he's looking like maybe taking even another step from last year, which would make him a special player. Colby McKercher, this was the first time that I got to see him play a full game and kind of what he looks like in this side. And he's Harry Sheasel version 2, to be honest. He's got great running carry. He's a fantastic left foot kick. And I don't think he made a mistake all day. He's going to be a massive part of our offensive game plan, along with Sheasel and potentially Zach Fisher. Just them bring the ball out of the back line is what it's going to look like. I love the way that he can become that 70, 80 metre player when he carries the ball 15, 20 and just boots it long and hits a target. So, he looked fantastic. I'd expect that he's going to be playing off half-back all year, like Sheasel did last year. Luke McDonald, another one that didn't play, he's still recovering from injury and hopefully conditioning, he'll get there soon. Jai Simpkin, I think, potentially proved a few people wrong that think there's just no room for him in the midfield this year. He certainly played some time half forward and some time in the midfield, but he was, again, he'd probably be, in the top 5 or so on field. showed off that sidestep and put on some great pressure as well. So, yeah, he was fantastic. I thought he worked really well with Wardlaw and Phillips and LDU. And, he just looks super fit. We know that he always wins a time trial. And, he's one of our fittest players. And he looked at today. I keep saying today. It was on Wednesday. It's just I did watch a little bit of it this morning just to jog my memory. He looked fantastic. Darcy Tucker, he was on limited game time, but he was playing on the wing, but pretty quiet when he was in the game. I don't think he was able to replicate his form from other match simulations, so he might need to replicate that in the upcoming practice matches if he's going to get a spot in the side, because he really didn't feature too much in this one. Liam Shields, reliable presence at times, nothing new to report really. He was as advertised. He's going to be great depth and great leadership around the club this year. Dylan Stevens is an interesting one. He did kick 2 goals and had a couple of good ball movement involvements, but I don't think he featured too heavily. So hopefully we can see more of him in the next couple of games. But yeah, I mean, sometimes that wingman is just a really hard running and you don't get reward for effort. And I think that was possibly his game today, because sure, he got in the end of 2, but I think he had one really good inside 50 kick, and beyond that, I couldn't tell you what else he did. So yeah, I think we know he's going to be on the wing round 1, but it wasn't his best game this week. Zachy Fisher is still recovering from that hamstring, didn't play. Riley Hardiman, I mean, yeah, he didn't light the game on fire, and that's okay. He played off half-back and did a few good things, but I don't think he'll be in calculations for round 1. But I think he probably showed enough that there's every chance that he might get his chance later in the year. So he was decent enough, but relatively quiet. Will Dawson played on Nick Larkey for an extended period, at least 2, and it might have been 3 quarters, and kept him to 1 goal in that time. So showed some really encouraging signs for such a young tool. Looks super mobile for his height, and we know that he's got to put some weight on, but yeah, I think he was faultless. He didn't really have any clangers. As I said, kept Larkey relatively quiet, and I think the great mark of a defender is if you can't look at their game and go, gee, they really got smashed in these moments. They're pretty good. So yeah, he showed plenty. I don't expect to see him in round 1, but as a long-term option, I think he showed a lot of promise. We know Griffin Logue didn't play, so hoping to see him in the middle of the year. Nick Larkey I just spoke about, and whilst he only kicked 1 on Will Dawson, he did finish with 4. He kicked 3 in the last quarter and also gave away a couple of goals. Business as usual. We know what we're going to get from him now. And if anything, I think he looked more dangerous than normal when the ball hit the ground. He seemed really lively, really athletic, and maybe that's because he was playing against some VFL players at times, but I thought he looked super sharp, didn't seem to run into the same areas as the other tall forwards, not that we have many out there. Expecting another big year from him. Speaking of other tall forwards, CCJ, who I really do want to believe in, I thought he had a pretty disappointing showing. He crumbed a goal early, but otherwise didn't really look great up forward or in the ruck. He still was getting bodied out of the way a little too easily and, looking a little clumsy. So, look, I think there's room for improvement. We know that he only has just got back into contact training, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt from that perspective. But, yeah, based on this, I'm not stoked on him being that second tall / second ruckman option. He's going to need to show more because the opposition for him wasn't amazing, and he still wasn't able to really feature outside of that early crumbing goal. So, yeah, a wait and watch on him. I'm not sold on him for this year at this stage. Taylor Goad did not play, and as a result of that, really, it was just CCJ, Cherry, and Finbar Maley in the ruck, which I'll get to a little bit later on. Tommy Powell, it was a classic Tom Powell performance. I thought floated in and out of the game. It probably wasn't his best showing from the preseason. Had a couple of moments of brilliance. Had some really great handballs in traffic that gave some space to other players on the outside, but it certainly wasn't a game that you look at and go, he's an absolute lock for round one. So, yeah, he's got some work to do in the next couple of games to prove himself. Curtis and Thomas, neither of those played, obviously, for different reasons. So we moved to Bergman, who I've heard mixed reports. I didn't love his game. I thought it was a bit he spent some time on the wing and some time at off halfback. And I think part of that is we've got so many halfback options, so it might mean that he needs to be that third or fourth wingman in order to get a spot in the side. He didn't find a heap of the ball, had a couple of errant kicks, but yeah, I think he's probably behind a few others in that line for halfback. He didn't have a bad game by any stretch. I just don't think that he really stamped himself on it. When you think about those rebounding halfbacks like Sheasel and McKercher were definitely ahead of him. And whilst I think Bergman's probably a little bit more defensively minded, got a bit more defensive nous, I wouldn't say that he's a lockdown. So yeah, he's an interesting one to watch. I'll quickly touch on Goda since I do sort of see them competing, and yeah, he looked healthier than last year. I think he looked better than Bergman. He's probably slightly ahead of Bergman for me, but not by much. You know, it was they both had pretty similar performances. I think Goda just has a bit more flexibility for me, and yeah, I could definitely see him playing off a wing, which I will talk about later on in the pod. So the two of them were okay. I'd have Goda just ahead personally, but I've heard some people with the opposite opinion, which is fine. We love different opinions on North. That's what makes sport so great. Biggie, this was again similar to McKercher, my first really close look at him. And I thought he read the ball well in the air at times. He marked it well. But when the ball hits the ground, just knowing where to go defensively, he's a bit of a liability at the moment. And that's fine. You know, we've got to figure these things out. He's playing in a new system. Had a really bad clanger, which, you know, everyone's entitled to have at during pre-season. He kicked into the man of the mark when he was kicking out of defence, and that resulted in a turnover goal. In the fourth quarter, he, Will Dawson and Pink were defending for Blue, and it was ugly. So the three of those I wouldn't expect to see playing alongside each other at any stage. But yeah, I think if he's got strong key defenders playing alongside him, I think if he's able to float in and be a third man, I think he's definitely an option. But I didn't love some of his one-on-one and his, as I said, what he did when the ball hit the ground. Will Phil, really liked his game in the middle. Combined really well with Wardlaw in particular. Really good kick, lowers his eyes, great by hand and tight, looks ready to take the next step this year. I think he's going to be my guy. I'm jumping on Will Phil. I do have a slight connection to him in that he went to my primary school. Let me rephrase. The primary school that I teach at is where he went to primary school. So an offhand connection there, but yeah, I think I'm ready to jump on Will Phil this year and make him my guy because he looks ready. Charlie Comben, pretty similar to Biggie. I thought read it well in the air, took some good marks, great pressure when the ball hits the ground, tackled really strongly. But his one-on-one body positioning is a big area of concerns. I really think Comben and Biggie are probably competing for that third tall, third man up kind of role because both of them can do that, but aren't great one-on-one. I thought it was a decent showing. He was limited minutes. I didn't see much of him, if anything, in the second half. So yeah, I thought it was a decent showing, but that one-on-one body positioning is going to be something he needs to work on. And then Toby Pink is the other sort of new defender down there, so to speak. I thought he was great in the first quarter, great in the fourth quarter, but not a lot to report outside of that. He floated in and out of the game, which you're entitled to do as a defender for what it's worth. He's not a rebounding defender. He's a lockdown option. I think he's as advertised. We know he knows where to go. He can take a mark, but I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens if he's on the opposition number one or two tall. I think, he's been in the VFL slash Sandful for a reason. So yeah, I think he'll provide a great backup option, but I'm not sure if he's got the attributes to play on the big boys. And you can see it out there. Like he does look like a small key position player. So he's a wait and watch. Braden George played off half back, pretty quiet, limited minutes. Did nothing wrong. He did a couple of good things, but yeah, he's just continuing to build. He's certainly not a chance for round one, I don't think, but he'll play this year for sure. Jackson Archer didn't play. Charles Aro, I thought, outside of LDU, probably looked like our best outside midfielder. He did swap around a little bit between the sides, and he was part of several whole ground chains where he just looked like he had more time than most other players, which has not been the case for him in the past. He's often been that player that's looked like under pressure. So hopefully this year maybe he's added a bit of pace and just a bit of nous to his game, and he's able to find space, because that has been a problem for him. I think if he's able to find a spot in the midfield rotation, he's going to thrive. It's just, whether or not he can find a spot in there. I'm sure the situation with Taron Thomas is maybe going to help a player like him. So yeah, he looked great. Cooper Harvey is another one that I thought looked fantastic. Kicked a goal in every quarter, so finished with 4. Looked really dangerous. So it's just whether or not he can maybe add a bit of defensive pressure to his game. There's definitely a spot for him if he can do that. I thought he looked a bit cleaner than he did last year when he came in. Still capable of a strong mark for his size. So yeah, he's definitely putting his hand up for round one, or putting some pressure on some of those more medium type players, because he does bring something a little bit different to them. Tristan Sherry, a really big story out of the game. It's preseason, so he had a belter. He's a bit of a preseason specialist, but I can't knock him for the game that he had. He only had Coleman Jones and Maley for competition, but he smashed them in the ruck. Like, it wasn't close. He was hitting it down to his size advantage all day. He was a threat around the ground too. Took some good marks, both in the middle of the ground and in defence, and wasn't a liability when disposing of it. We saw it last year. He's not bad for a clearance. Sometimes he just taps it down to himself and clears it, and he did that a bit. But he was also, as I said, like taking marks in the centre of the ground and then, moving it on pretty quickly. So if he could bring that for an actual opposition game, it's going to be massive for us and massive for him. But yeah, it's the preseason, so I just really hope that he can stay fit now and play this sort of game. In a real AFL game, because he's never played a game like that at AFL level, I don't think. But I have known it's there for him. Finbar, Maley toiled away. He's clearly a way off being an AFL ruckman, and that's okay. I thought he looked a little bit better around the ground than he did in the ruck contests, but as I said, he was thoroughly beaten by Cherry, and that's understandable. Eddie Ford didn't play. Hopefully he's going to be pushing it for round one. I personally don't expect him to make it for round one, just based on how much of the preseason he's missed now. Blake Jury played off half forward, and to be honest, I'll talk about him and Hansen Jr. in the same breath, I think. Both sort of forward roles. Hansen Jr. played a little bit of wing, and they both looked dangerous at times, but weren't really able to capitalise. Jury kicked one, and Hansen Jr. didn't hit the scoreboard. So yeah, I think they're both still down the pecking order. I didn't see anything from either of them that made me think that they're going to surprise us for round one, but similar to Cooper Harvey, I think if either of them can really add some tackling, defensive pressure, that'd be a real chance, because they do have that ability to be a bit of a pest at ground level when the ball hits the deck. So if they can add in the ability to also hit the scoreboard and bring some tackling pressure, I think they'll put themselves in the running. But yeah, I didn't see that from their performance. Cal Dawson played a really consistent role, lockdown defender. I didn't see an error that he made. And whilst I don't expect him to be a major distributor, I think purely on his defense, he had a great game. He's ready to step into the Ben Mackay's shoes, I think, and play key defence. And it might mean that we need to put up with a few poor performances as he develops. But yeah, I do think he's ready. He's 25, and I think that's something that's worth remembering. It's not like he's 20. He's been on our list for now 2.5 years, but he came in mature aged. So yeah, I think he's ready. Hamish Free did not play, which is why part of why the ruck stocks were so slim. And finally, Cam Zerha. Kicked 4. He looked really dangerous in the forward line all day. Just looked like an informed version of himself. Didn't look like anything new. We've seen him play games like that before. I do think it was interesting that I didn't see him step into the midfield at all, and I'm okay with that if he's playing that dangerously in the forward line, but I would expect to see him roll through the midfield a little bit this year. But yeah, he was fantastic. We know that he's a lock for round 1 alongside Nick Larkey, but it was great to see him in form because we know there's been a lot of talk about him in the preseason, and it's a massive year for him, contract year, massive year for both him and us, because I certainly would like to keep him here, but I would totally understand if he'd said, I've had enough of losing and I want to go somewhere else. So yeah, that's what I saw from the game. It's all of that's with the caveat that we were playing ourselves and some VFL players. So as we play Collingwood and St Kilda over the next couple of weeks, things will probably crystallise a little bit better. And, whilst both of those sides will also be experimenting, at least you're playing someone that's a bit less prepared for what you're going to do. So yeah, I think some really promising signs, but with the caveat that it's just an intra-club at the end of the day. Yeah, so some great stuff to see there. The midfield then. I'm probably going to make this a little bit shorter and sharper than some of the other area of the ground previews that I've done, just based on the fact that I've walked you through, 35 odd players from Match Sim. But yeah, in terms of what we've got in the middle, we know that the ruck stocks are pretty slim. So Tristan Sherry, Taylor Goad, Finbar Maley, Coleman Jones, and Hugh Greenwood potentially is that backup option. Biggie Newen, it certainly looks like he's going to play back. So although, one of the roles that he can play is ruck, I don't think we're going to be playing him there unless things get really dire. I think this is the year for Tristan Sherry. I think Taylor Goad's a couple of years off, really being an option. Goldstein's left, so Cherry is the one that's left there, and I think it's going to be a fight between Coleman Jones and maybe a Greenwood, or maybe even potentially a Maley for that second ruck option. But yeah, if Cherry's fit, I think he plays every week, and if he could be putting on performances like he did in this match sim, every second week, he's going to be a great player for us. So I think the way I see it is we're hoping that Cherry can be that ruckman for the next sort of 4 or 5 years whilst Taylor Goad develops, and then maybe it becomes a Taylor Goad, and who knows? Anything can change over that period of time, and maybe we bring in a free agent or pick up a mature age ruckman that can play better than all of those players. But I think that's the plan. I think it's Cherry, and we've got some insurance if that doesn't go well. I'm going to reiterate, I really don't think Coleman Jones is a ruckman primarily, but I'm happy to see him do some stuff around the ground. And Greenwood, I think he can pinch hit. I don't love the idea of him being the default backup ruckman. I think I'd prefer to see Coleman Jones get that time and just see if it can work. But it's great to have Greenwood there as an option, and who knows, if injuries are happening in the year, like I could see a situation where Greenwood's playing, Cherry's playing, and Coleman Jones is playing, because Greenwood is so flexible. He can play up in the forward line. He can play as an actual midfielder. And obviously we know he can kind of play as that backup ruckman. So plenty of options there, but not really is the gist of the ruck stocks. In terms of the midfield, I think, we know we've got plenty of players there. Greenwood, as I just said, can play as a midfielder. Don't expect him to, but he can if injuries are really, really hitting us. is there as an option, as a grunt work sort of clearance type player that can lay some fantastic tackling pressure. I don't expect, based on what I've seen this week now, to see Sheasel play much midfield time. I think if he wasn't playing backline, it's more likely we'd see him in the forward line, just based on what I saw today. But again, what I saw earlier on. But who knows? But that's my prediction. It looks to me like he's not going to spend much time in the middle. Curtis Taylor, I mentioned him earlier. He could play on the wing, but I think there's plenty ahead of him, so I'm not expecting to see that in round one. We know what we're going to get from Georgie Wardlaw. It's just whether or not we need to keep managing his body, and in terms of resting him for games or limiting his game time, because we know that he was on pretty restricted minutes last year when he did play. And even then, he did have that hamstring awareness at the end of the year. But yeah, just hoping that he can build and develop. I think he's an absolute lock in the midfield if he's fit, because he's just got that ability to get in there and get the ball and feed it out. But then also he's got that step on the outside. So super exciting. I'm hoping that he can temper the way he plays a little bit at times and get caught holding the ball less. But you also want to see him taking the game on, particularly in pre-season and kind of seeing, what he's capable of. I think Bailey Scott, when he's fit, is a lock for that wing. I know that he was being trialled at half-back, but I personally think we've got so many options off half-back. I'm not sure why we'd need to do that. Maybe the coaching group think that he's got that capacity to defend and then also rebound. But I would love to just see him play off the wing. We know that that's where he's played his best footy. And sure, he can sort of rotate through half-back at times, but yeah, I'd like to see him primarily on the wing, and I just have a feeling that's where we will see him. I don't really think I need to say too much more about LDU than what I said earlier. He's obviously a lock. He's our best midfielder, and if we were a good side, which we're not, he'd be the player that you'd be picking for the Brownlow, because he stands out. He's the sort of player that draws an umpire's vote. So yeah, I think just a small step from him this year is all we need. We don't need much more from him. And I think similar to Wardlaw, I'd just like to see him know his limits and give the ball off a little bit more. McKercher, I don't expect to see in the midfield this year based on what I've seen from him in pre-season. I think he needs to do the Harry Sheasel role and pretty much stay off half-back, because that's a great way for him to learn the game. But, I mean, he's a lock for me in terms of playing. He's a lock off half-back. I think Jai Simpkin definitely he's another lock for me. He's our captain. But, yeah, for those people that have forgotten what he can do, I think this intraclub was a great example. He was fantastic in tight. He had the step. He was great at tackling. And, even when he is playing off half-forward, he's essentially going to be an extra midfielder, because he'll be pushing up so high and getting back. I think there's potential for him to be a great crummer at Larky's feet also, but I think we're in a place where he should definitely still be playing in the midfield, and yeah, I think he will be. Tucker's an interesting one, because I think probably his best spot is on the wing. So we know that, I'm about to talk about Dylan Stephens. I think Dylan Stephens and Bailey Scott are the primary wingmen, but I think there's probably an option to have Tucker rotating through the wing. Yeah, as I said, didn't have a great match sim, didn't feature much, but we know that prior to that, he's had a really good preseason, and he is a mature player too. He's in that age bracket that we don't have a lot of players in. I think he might be 29, if I had to guess. He's a mature player, brings some a mature body, so I expect to see him get some time. Liam Shields is great depth. And I think, when we've got injuries or suspensions or just some general soreness, I think he'll be a great option to bring into the wing or into the middle. He can do either of those things, and we know Clarko loves him, so he's going to play. I just spoke about Dylan Stephens. Whilst he had a quiet match sim, I do think he's going to play off that other wing from Bailey Scott. So you can lock him and Bailey Scott in as starters for round one, I think. Tom Powell is an interesting one, just because I think he's like Lazaro, who I'll talk about in a minute. The two of them need to be playing midfield. if they're going to be in the side. I just don't think we can play them as the sub or as half forwards, or certainly not regularly as the sub. He didn't have an amazing game, but I think we saw what he could do in that last round last year. If he's playing his proper position in the midfield, he can be fantastic. It's just whether or not he can find a spot in there. Taron Thomas, obviously, if available, he's in there, but it certainly doesn't look like he's going to be available for the start of the year. Will Phil, he's my man. I'm on him this year. I think, personally, for me, he's a lock. I don't think he's an out-and-out definite lock, but for me, he is. I don't know if that makes sense. What I'm trying to say is I'm not certain that Match Committee sees him as a lock, but I do. I think him, Wardlaw, LDU, Simpkin are sort of locks for that midfield rotation. And personally, I think Lazaro is probably the other one. That way you got 5 that I think are going to rotate pretty heavily through the middle. Obviously with Cherry and the ruck and the wings on the outer, and then you've got a couple of those that can rotate through half forward, like Zerha. So yeah, I think Phillips, it's a massive year for him. He needs to work on his clearance game, which I know he will. And then I think he's such a great kick going inside 50. He's not a big penetrating kick like someone like LDU, but I trust him over 35, 40 metres more than I trust most of our midfielders. We've got a lot of midfielders that just kick it, like LDU, like Jai Simpkin. So it's great to have a player like Phillips that can lower his eyes and hit a shorter target or hit up someone on the lead. Bergman and Goda I talked about earlier. I think they're probably sort of secondary options on the wing. I certainly wouldn't be seeing them play in the midfield, but if there's some injuries, or if Tucker or Stevens or Scott aren't in form, I could see those two off a wing. So there are options there, but certainly more fringe options. Lazaro, I just spoke about. I think his performances in the preseason make me think that he's definitely going to get a spot, probably starting on the bench. But I think he'll be rotating through, and he's like Powell. He needs to play midfield. We can't put him off half forward and drop him because he's only touched it 5 times. I think, whilst I'm happy if he plays sub once or twice, I do think he just needs to get out and out midfield minutes. So yeah, I think it's a make or break year for him, but I do have faith in him based on what we've seen. And then the other two there, Zerha and Hansen Jr. are certainly players that could rotate through. Hansen Jr. on the wing, we saw that in the intraclub. I wouldn't expect to see him playing wing unless things are really going pear-shaped. But Zerha is the interesting one. There's always the talk about what's his split going to be, forward line, midfield time. And, probably the opportunities for him in the midfield open up a little bit if Taron Thomas isn't playing. But I certainly would prefer to see Cam playing mostly forward line because he is so dangerous down there. So I guess just recapping, I think the locks are certainly Wardlaw, LDU, Simpkin, Phillips and Lazaro for me. Obviously with Cherry in the ruck spot. I think on the wing, Scott and Stevens are locks there, and then probably you've got players like Tucker, Gota, maybe even Lazaro going through that wing position. Liam Shields can also play there in a pinch. And then, Powell, Shields, Greenwood, Taron Thomas, they're all going to get games, you would think, but I don't see them as being there at the start, I suppose. Powell's, for me, I think Lazaro's ahead of Powell right now, which is interesting. I wouldn't have had it that way 12 months ago, but I think, Lazaro and Powell are kind of fighting it out for that last midfield spot. And, I think Lazaro's got it. And I'd prefer to see Powell playing midfield in the VFL than I would, a forward pocket in the AFL personally, because at least then he's playing in the midfield, and if he can knock down the door, then maybe he can, knock out a Lazaro if he's out of form. So that's all the players that I think should feature in the midfield. Plenty to think about there. I think it's the old, we've got to see what it looks like once we start playing some real opposition, because we know that this time of year it's very easy to get excited about players and then for them to not necessarily show us what we thought they were going to show us in the real deal. I'll finish up with some big questions for the midfield that I think, we've got to look at ahead of this year. Tristan Xerri, I think the big problem or the big question is if he goes down or he's drastically out of form, what do we do? Because, as I said, I really don't think we have any great options to replace him as the primary ruckman. I don't think... I assume that if that was to happen, that Cal Coleman-Jones would be the next man up to be the primary ruckman, I think. Finbar Maley, he looks not strong enough at all in the ruck contests to be that primary ruckman. So I assume it'd be Coleman-Jones. I assume that Taylor Goad, we're hoping that we don't have to blood him at all this year and he can just spend a year in the VFL developing his body, developing his game. But I guess you've got him there if you really needed him. Hamish Free is an interesting one because I guess you probably could use him as that more mature body if you needed to, but I don't think we'll be spending much time developing him. I do think that he's probably just been there as insurance for the last year, and I think it's going to be similar this year. So yeah, hopefully Cherry doesn't go down. Hopefully he has a breakout season, but I do worry if it doesn't work with him, what our other options are there. It's a big concern. I guess, what about that tier down? Like, which of those players can cement a spot is my next big question. So Powell, Lazaro, Tucker, even I would objectively probably say Phillips, even though I feel like he's in for me. Which of those players can really cement a spot in the side? And really it's Powell and Lazaro and Phillips that I'm looking at there. I think Tucker, just his age profile makes him a little bit of a different proposition because I think he'll come in and out depending on need, whereas the other three, I think if they can have elite form and sort of force the selector's hand, that's what will be interesting to me. So it's going to be fascinating to see in sort of round 24 this year, at the end of the year, which of those Powell, Lazaro and Tucker, we see as, walk-up starts, and hopefully it's not none of them. Hopefully at least one of them and hopefully maybe even two can really cement a spot and make the selectors, have to think about who to push out. Question 3, can the midfield group develop enough defensive capacity collectively? I spoke about that at the top of the pod, but I think at times last year players like Phillips were being dropped because of their lack of ability to defend, and I think it's not an individual problem, it's a system problem. I don't think that LDU defends super hard, and I think you look at those midfielders that are starting for us, and to be honest, like Taron Thomas is probably our best tackler in that group, and it doesn't look like he's going to be playing. So I just think, the whole ground defensive pressure, it was a problem for us last year. It doesn't look good this year either. So I'm hoping that collectively we can work on a system that is going to be able to stop opposition sides in their tracks and it's going to make them have to kick long to contests because, that's how you bite off turnovers. But yeah, that's a big question. I think I don't have any problem in believing that we're going to have a great offensive midfield. It's just, what does it look like defensively that worries me a little bit. Wardlaw's the same. He's a really see ball, get ball type player. And whilst he's a fantastic tackler, I don't know how structure-wise, how smart he is with defensive mindedness at the moment. And the last big question for the midfield, I touched on it before, like how much midfield time do some of those sort of fringe midfielders get? And when I say fringe midfielders, I mean like Shees, McKercher, Zerha, the players that are in the side, but, are they in the midfield rotation, I guess? Yeah, I just think it's going to be interesting to see whether we're trying to develop a lot of flexibility with these players or if we just go, here's our midfielders, and we've got one or two that can maybe roll through there if we need. Personally, based on what I've seen, I'd be keeping Sheasel and McKercher out of there, but I'd be putting Zerha through at times just to show a little bit of something different, which I think I talked about in the forward line preview episode. But we'll see. I think, things change throughout the year, and I'd be more than happy if, everything's going well and one of Sheasel or McKercher is maybe spending some more time in the middle. But yeah, I just think we've got so many out and out midfielders that I don't need us to be investing heaps of midfield time in players like Sheasel, McKercher and Zerha, because we've got players that can do that. But yeah, I think that'll be an interesting thing to have a look at across the year. So that's going to do it for this podcast. I hope to be back in a week or so talking about the pre-season game against the Pies, and maybe we'll start building what our best 23 or 22 looks like ahead of round one, because we are getting relatively close. We're less than a month away. So yeah, I will be back in a week or so with something like that. We'll see how we go. Hope that everyone has a fantastic week. It's an exciting time of year. It's an exciting time to be in Melbourne. We've got Taylor Swift playing here. We've got Blink-182 here. It's a lot of things happening around Melbourne at the moment. So it's an exciting time to be here. Yeah, a busy time of year. So hopefully we're all excited for the season to start, because right now everyone's on 0 wins, 0 losses until the season starts, and we'll see what happens from there. All the usual stuff. Hit me up on social media if you just want to chat football, or you've got something to ask me, and if you do have any ideas or things that you want to answer on the podcast, always happy to give it a go. So at North Pod Show on pretty much all social media, and I'll speak to you in approximately a week. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.